Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar on comparative effectiveness research. Surveys provide a snapshot in time by offering a perspective on what stakeholders are thinking at any given moment. Surveys also provide us with a baseline to track changes in their perceptions year over year. So when it comes to comparative effectiveness research, CER, as we will refer to it primarily today, and the environment for healthcare decision-making, the National Pharmaceutical Council has been tracking these issues and these changes and keeping our fingers on the pulse of stakeholders for the last 5 years. So since we took our first snapshot of stakeholder perceptions in 2011, we have seen shifts in which organizations are considered to be leaders in areas such as establishing CER standards and conducting, monitoring, and funding the research. It's also clear that stakeholders today feel very strongly about the importance of CER. Now that's likely because CER has been steadily gaining stakeholders' attention over the last number of years. In addition, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, PCORI, has greatly raised its profile by awarding more than $700 million in research grants, creating advisory councils, and maintaining an ongoing dialogue with patients and advocacy organizations. So what do stakeholders think about CER, its impact on decision-making, and other issues impacting the healthcare environment? Those are some of the questions we're going to address today. And to walk us through the answers to those questions, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Kimberly Westrich. Kimberly is the Vice President of Health Services Research here at the National Pharmaceutical Council, and for the last 5 years has led this survey project that we have done in conjunction with our partners, Social and Scientific Systems Incorporated. After Kimberly's presentation, where she'll walk through the results of our survey, we'll hear from two special guest reactors, Dr. Joe Selby, who is the Executive Director of PCORI, and Dr. Lisa Simpson, who's the President and CEO of Academy Health. They'll provide us with some outside perspectives on the survey results, and then we'll open up for questions among the folks on the call here today. Right now, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Kimberly Westrich.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's hard for me to believe that we have been doing this survey for 5 years. And one thing that really makes this possible and so much fun to do is our great partnership with Social and Scientific Systems, Inc. So before I dive into the results, I do just want to give a shout out to Jess Wilhelms and Narenjana Kawalesar, who have just been great research partners on this and such a pleasure to work with, and really do make this a fun survey to do each year. This first slide shows you who we talked to, who we survey. We have 122 survey respondents this year, which is very similar to past years. What is slightly different about this year is the individual slices that you see there of the stakeholders that we reach out to. These are all stakeholders who are knowledgeable about CER, familiar with it. There are key stakeholders that we reach out to. What's different this year is we had a slightly lower response among insurers and health plans than we have in past years. So that is something to keep in mind, that each year things shift a bit. So any trends that we see could be the result of slightly differentiations in the survey respondents each year. As I'm going through my slides, you'll see a couple of slides that have this key logo in the top corner. That's signaling to you that those are the key takeaways from this year's survey. I'd like to just go through them quickly so you have them top of mind as I do go through the results. Comparative effectiveness research is still important. Its actual impact on healthcare decision-making at this point is more promise than reality, but stakeholders are optimistic that within 3 to 5 years we will see that reality achieved. We're seeing the field moving towards agreed-upon research standards. There's still opportunities in terms of getting to a complete evidence base and using real-world evidence more widely. So this is our first key takeaway. CER is still important. On this particular chart, you see trends from all 5 years, 2011 to this year's survey, 2015, and each individual bar shows the responses for that year, with the purple at the top indicating very important. So you see that it's been roughly consistent throughout the years, some small shifts in the distribution, but from a statistical standpoint, It's been relatively unchanged. There has been no decrease in the extent to which our stakeholders feel that comparative effectiveness research is important to them and important to their organizations. So there's a lot going on in this slide. I'm going to do some quick level setting because the next series of slides will all look the same. We ask the survey respondents which groups they think will play a key role in a variety of topics. This first one is research standards, which groups will play a key role in setting research standards. It is a multiple response answer, so the numbers will not add up to 100. The groups are the same for each question. The actual years that you're seeing when you look at this survey are only 3 years of the survey. The first year, 2011, the middle year, 2013, this year, 2015, and that's sort of for ease of exposition. We'd have a lot of bars on there if I showed you all 5 years of the survey. And then finally, the bars that are bolded are the ones that we're focusing on for each question. So at that level setting, what are we looking at here? Who will play a key role in establishing research standards? PCORI is very much perceived to have a key role in this area. 77% of stakeholders identify them this way. This really isn't surprising. PCORI does require grant recipients to follow the research standards that are set out in its methodology report. Other key stakeholders in this area are AHRQ with 68%, and both NIH and academia are viewed as having equal roles. 50% of stakeholders identify them. This next chart looks at who will have key roles in establishing research priorities. Here, again, we see PCORI as having a very important role, followed by NIH and AHRQ. The next chart looks at who's going to play a key role in funding and monitoring research. Here, it's perhaps not at all surprising to see that PCORI's role has really grown. They've awarded more than $700 million in grants, so they've unquestionably had an impact on stakeholders' perception of their importance in this area. They are followed in this space by NIH. 73% of stakeholders identified NIH as having a key role. They've committed over $600 million in grants. And then industry is also important. The biopharmaceutical industry in this space, they also make very large investments in research. In the area of conducting research, academia is definitely played as having a key role. This isn't surprising given that academic institutions are often awarded PCORI's grants. The biopharmaceutical industry also plays a key role in this space, with 60% of stakeholders identifying them as playing a key role. This is the final chart in this series. It looks a little bit different because we introduced this question in 2014. We thought we really should be keeping track of who has a key role in translating and disseminating research. In this space, AHRQ is seen as having the primary role. Again, this is not surprising because they're assigned by federal law with the task of actually disseminating the PCORI-funded research. So we would expect to see them as the lead agency handling these responsibilities. And they are closely followed in this space by PCORI and academia. So that's the end of that particular series of questions. The next key finding is how much of an impact has comparative effectiveness research had on healthcare decision making? Now you are no longer looking at trends over the various years of the survey. You're looking at a snapshot from this year's survey. So we asked stakeholders, when you look back over the past year, how much of an impact has it had? When you look out over the next year, how much of an impact do you think it will have? When you look out over 3 years, when you look out over 5 years. So that first bar is looking historically over the past year, and here only 19% said that over the past year it had led to either a moderate or a substantial improvement. That's the green and the purple sections at the very top of that first bar. Then we start to look out over the next year. It grows a little bit. 33% of the respondents think that it will have a moderate to substantial impact over the next 12 months. But it really isn't until we get to 3 years or 5 years that you start to see significant numbers, with 83 and 93% saying it will have a moderate or substantial impact. Now, what's particularly interesting about this particular chart that you can't see here is if I did have last year's chart, the year before, if you could see the historical trend here, the stakeholders really update their perceptions every year. It looks very similar. If I had last year's chart, it would look almost identical to this chart. And what I find interesting is how people are continuing to be so optimistic. And one thing that Joe and Lisa will be commenting on is what kinds of things need to be happening in the environment to really recognize the promise of comparative effectiveness research on healthcare decision making. So I'm going to go through a series of issues on the last set of slides that I've got. This is to kind of help you orient to what we're looking at. I'm going to present 6 issues. We actually have 9 issues in the Comparative Effectiveness Research booklet that is available on our website. I'm just presenting 6 of them in the interest of time today. If you'd like to dig into all of them, of course, you can download that booklet from our website. So each one of these issues, we've got a left anchor and a right anchor. So for that very top issue, you'll see that the left anchor is having no agreed upon research standards. The right anchor is having widely agreed upon research standards. And we asked stakeholders to identify where they thought we were along this continuum. And they could pick any number from 1 through 7. What I'll be reporting in the slides that you'll see after this one are either a negative inclination, 1, 2, or 3, leaning towards the left anchor, or a positive inclination, 5, 6, and 7, leaning towards the right anchor. And the reason I describe them as negative versus positive is the left anchors really are an environment that's less favorable for patients, and the right side, the more positive side, is more favorable for patients. So this first slide shows the extent to which we have agreed upon research standards. Again, I'll spend a little more time on the slide to orient you to what you're looking at, since future slides will look very similar to this one. You'll see the needle up there at the top to remind you what you're looking at. This is agreed upon research standards with a left orientation of no agreed upon research standards and a right anchor of widely agreed upon research standards. And then you see 3 pairs of bars below. Each pair of bars represents 1 year of the survey. Again, I'm only showing you 3 years to avoid too much data on the slide, but if you would like to see more, we do have more information on our website. So that first pair of bars shows the way things looked in the first year of our survey. So in 2011, 50% of the respondents felt that we were on the side of no or few agreed upon research standards, and 24% thought that we were on the more favorable side with more or widely agreed upon standards. This particular issue is one where we've actually had a significant change over time. When you look at the situation today, it's almost a mirror image, with 28% saying no or few agreed upon standards and 49% saying, yeah, we've gotten to some widely agreed upon standards in this area. I'm pleased to see this, given the work that PCORI's put out on the methodology report, and I would certainly expect this, and this is one of the key findings from our survey this year. The second issue that I'd like to look at is research priorities. Here the left anchor is the extent to which research priorities do not adequately address treatment choices that patients and providers are faced with. The right anchor is priorities adequately assess treatment choices. This one is interesting if you look at the trends over the years of the survey. We started in a situation where 40% were on the negative side, 37% were on the positive side. In the middle survey that we did in 2013, you could see that we had really moved in a significantly backward direction. 52% of our stakeholders felt like the research priorities didn't address the treatment choices faced by patient and providers well at all. In this year's survey, we have moved back to the baseline level. We're kind of course correcting, if you will. So we're moving in a good direction, and we're hoping to see that we continue to move in this direction. The third issue that I'd like to touch on has to do with the process in which evidence is interpreted, how transparent and objective the process is. The left anchor, negative anchor for patients, is a process where the way that evidence is interpreted is not at all transparent and objective. The positive anchor is a place where the interpretation of evidence is fully transparent and objective. And this is one where we've seen just a little bit of progress, but nothing significant over the years of our survey. The last three issues that I'm going to explore are questions that we added in 2014. So for these, we've only got two pairs of data. We've only got 2014, 2015. So there isn't a whole lot of movement in any of these because we haven't had a lot of time for the issues to evolve, but we think they're very important. The first one is how complete the evidence is. The left anchor is there's no evidence available, and the right anchor is that the evidence base is as complete as it needs to be in order to inform the choices faced by patient and providers. And here you can see that there's a lot of opportunity to expand the evidence base. This isn't surprising. There's a lot of work to be done, and Picori and others are working to fill the evidence base and make sure that we've got the information out there that is needed. Another new question that we added in 2014 is the extent to which real-world evidence is being used. And stakeholders really felt that it's limited in decision-making. Again, the left anchor is real-world evidence not being used at all. The right anchor is real-world evidence being widely used. And here you can see that 44% said that real-world evidence is limited in decision-making. So this is one of the key findings of our survey. There's an opportunity to be using real-world evidence more widely. And the final issue that I'd like to touch on, and again, this is a question that we added in 2014, is the extent to which patient variability or patient response, variability in patient response is taken into account for treatment. And here, again, there's an opportunity to be taking it into greater response, with the responses very similar when you look at last year compared to this year. Again, I'd like to remind you of the key takeaways from this year's survey, that CER is very important to our stakeholders, that the impact on healthcare decision-making at this point is more promise than reality, but those stakeholders are optimistic when you look at that 3 to 5 year time horizon. We are definitely seeing the field move towards agreed upon research standards, and the evidence base is not yet viewed as complete. More opportunity there, and again, more opportunity to use real-world evidence more widely.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kimberly. So that's a run through the results from this year's survey. And now we get to move into the more interactive part of our program, the comments by our special guests here today. So first, I'd like to turn to Joe Selby. Joe was the executive director of Picori, and as you saw in the results, Picori is key role in comparative effectiveness research, and we've seen that trend where Picori's influence has been growing over the last number of years. So, Joe, why don't you just give us your top-line comments and thoughts, having now seen the survey results.
Hi, Dan. Thanks very much. And I want to say a sincere thanks to you and Kimberly and the National Pharmaceutical Council for continuing to conduct this survey. You know, it might be a small sample size, and some might say, gee, this isn't so necessarily representative, but you know, you've built a constancy into it from year to year. We don't see wild swings. So it gives me at least this instinctive feeling that there really is value in looking at this, and that's brought by doing it periodically and repeatedly. So it builds my confidence. I think it's useful, and I hope you will continue doing it, because I think the optimism, the optimism in the face of what seems like, you know, no change in the amount of evidence or the impact yet is realistic, and it fits with the timeline of comparative effectiveness research. So I want to make brief comments in 5 areas of the survey. One is about the importance of comparative effectiveness research, and the second is about the need for standards. The third is about funding for comparative effectiveness research. The fourth about dissemination of comparative effectiveness research findings, because nobody's going to be able to feel the impact unless it gets disseminated. And the fifth is about patient-centeredness in comparative effectiveness research. So first, to the importance of comparative effectiveness research. And I will note with a smile on my face that the key takeaway messages, I compared the slides from last year and this year, and if I'm not mistaken, they were exactly the same. So that's not surprising, but it was a little curious, funny. With respect to the importance of comparative effectiveness research, I just have to say, I probably said this last year, of course, comparative effectiveness research is important. It's one of those things like the electronic health record that just has enough obvious value that you don't see anyone backing away from it. It's the only way to understand which of two or more choices is better, and ultimately, which is better for which patients. I think that the world is doing more comparative effectiveness research, not just PCORI, but others. I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't an effect of the ARA funding, because they funded some of the large initial wave of CER that's now showing up in our journals. The sense that CER isn't quite yet impacting care is probably accurate, but I'll also say that, you know, it could be a sneaky thing, and it could begin impacting our practice before we even quite notice it. So we're going to have to design some careful and objective evaluations of this question. Is CER, in fact, starting to impact practice? And I think we will probably find with an objective assessment, we'll find that objective assessment moving maybe before the awareness moves. So that's the one thing. It's CER is the right thing to do for helping patients and clinicians know which choice to make. Don't think we're going to go away from it. On the area of standards, I'm really pleased to see in the data a recognition of PCORI's important role here, and really the impact of the initial methodology standards, which were released right at the end of 2012. So these initial standards have been picked up. They've been cited heavily. We are just about to release continuing medical education training in these standards. And the NC continues to work, working on areas where new standards are needed. Two of the areas that the Methodology Committee, the MC, are currently working on are standards for analyzing complex interventions. A lot of our particularly care delivery studies use complex interventions, and the capacity to sort of tease out what works within those interventions is an area where methods need to be developed and disseminated. And the second area they're working on is cluster designs, also important in a wide variety of comparative effectiveness research applications and analyses, but again, especially for these systems-level kinds of interventions. There's another area where I think we really all need better evaluation tools, and that is for detecting heterogeneity of treatment effects, that is variability in treatment effectiveness across patients, and being able to convert that into decision support tools that help get at what will work best for me, the patient, given my personal situation. So this survey asked about it and found no improvement over the last 2 years in the use of variation evidence for individual decision making. The question, I think, is how do we take data and build better prediction rules for what will work for whom, and then how do we get these tools into the hands of patients and clinicians, and then how do we build trust in these tools? So that's a methodologic area that I think needs has a lot of potential, needs a lot of work. I'll also say that PCORI has invested a very large amount in standing up PCORNet, which is a patient-centered clinical data infrastructure at a national level. And part of its aim is to be able to support much larger studies more efficiently and to generate reliable data on treatment effectiveness in real-world settings. So there was a notion that we're not really using real-world evidence as much as we should. So we want this will be large-scale real-world evidence. It should facilitate more rapid uptake and dissemination, and it should also give us the capacity to look more carefully at variation or treatment heterogeneity. So that's it for standards. On funding, it's not surprising, as Kimberly said, that awareness of PCORI as a key funder is growing because our contributions are growing. And we will continue to be a major funder of comparative effectiveness research, but certainly others are going to continue to do it too. And it's good to see that everyone recognizes the important roles of the NIH and the industry there. We surely can't do all the needed comparative effectiveness research ourselves. I think both NIH and industry are doing more, and that's needed. As I said, it's just oftentimes the right kind of research to be done. So that's it for funding. In the area of dissemination, which is what it's going to take if we want to see CER's impact, I was really pleased to see the critical role in dissemination. ARC is an institution that has a lot of expertise in dissemination and a lot of passion for dissemination, not just PCORI's research, but that of NIH and others, evidence in general. So that is ARC's role. As Kimberly said, they are assigned that role in the PCORI legislation and otherwise. We work closely with ARC in planning dissemination of our findings. They're a true partner. And it's very likely that we will, from time to time, decide to augment ARC's work in collaboration with them because dissemination is so important. And I'll also say there are a number of national foundations that spend a lot of time supporting dissemination, and I think they need to be recognized. And collaborations between federal partners and partners like PCORI and national foundations can go a long ways to making dissemination the national coordinated effort that it ought to be. Academy Health certainly plays a role there too. And the very last thing I want to say is there was concern that treatment assessments still aren't patient-centered. They're too focused on narrow clinical considerations. That is concerning. I think, shared decision-making is probably the most obvious answer in many cases for changing that. Collecting the data, which we certainly do, we demand from our awardees that they collect outcomes information on all the outcomes that are important to patients. But shared decision-making then is the way that you take that evidence and put it into a package so that physicians and patients can look at the range of outcomes that might be important and might be preferred differently among patients. So when do you share decision-making? Who should be involved in shared decision-making? And how best to do it, what kind of tools work the best, are all unanswered questions. And we're going to have to figure that one out, I think, certainly if care is going to become more patient-centered. And I think as we begin to do that, we will find research becoming more and more patient-centered as well. So again, thanks, and I'll turn it back to you, Dan.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Okay, we also have with us Lisa Simpson of Academy Health, and Lisa's been monitoring the results of our survey for the last several years. And Lisa, would love to have your comments and thoughts on what you're hearing and seeing today.
I also had 4 points that I wanted to make. I'll probably only make 3 given the time frame. And they really echo a lot of what Joe already said. So first, I want to thank the National Pharmaceutical Council for their leadership and Kimberly for her great presentation in doing this every year. It really is very helpful to see where the field is going. And I think this year particularly, where we're at the 5-year mark for the anniversary of the passage of the Affordable Care Act that established the PCOR Trust Fund and the creation of PCORI, I think it's a nice opportunity to sort of sit back and reflect on where the field is going of CER. So the first point I would make is about the sustained enthusiasm for the value and future impact of CER. And Joe commented about folks not having seen improvement yet or not perceiving improvement. I actually think that slide with 58% reporting in the past year slight improvement is actually, people are pretty enthusiastic and seeing a lot, perhaps more than I see. But so I think the enthusiasm is great, and this is critical because we have to make sure that the funders of this research across all agencies and the purse strings, i.e. Congress, really understand how valuable this field is and the contributions it will make, and that research takes time. So I just underscore that. I would say that one of the data points that your survey speaks to that has been alluded to by both Joe and Dan already is the significant doubling of folks who see PCORI as an agency funding and monitoring research. That's obvious. The money's gone up. People recognize that. But what's not captured there, or what one cannot tease out, is how many are aware of the work that PCORI is doing that goes beyond monitoring research and really trying to build a portfolio of activities that capitalizes on collaboration across investigators, that creates learning networks, and that also tries to dig into both the PCORI portfolio, but in the context of the rest of the funding agencies world, so that that PCORI is really making sure it's funding unique studies in gap areas that are absolutely aligned with its mission. So I think there's much more going on in terms of creating learning communities through PCORI's funding that we're seeing across also the ARC funding and NIH. So I think that's very exciting. The second point I want to quickly make is around where research is being conducted. We're seeing, in your survey you have academics and industry, but we're also seeing in our field of membership and throughout the field more and more private sector engagement, whether it's delivery systems, and also now with activities like the patient-powered research networks that PCORI funded, research being done in different settings. So I think that's exciting. On standards, critically important. I'm glad to see that significant increase, as Joe was as well. And this is particularly important in the area of the use of electronic data, because we've got this expanding volume, variety, and velocity of data. How do we use this to really produce robust research that's going to inform decision-making, not just at the point of care, but also for systems and populations? And I'll close just on mentioning dissemination. I was so glad to see this added question in the survey, so thank you, NPC. This is going to be critical if we're going to be able to reap the benefit from these investments. ARC, PCORI, everybody needs to do a much better job, all of us together, in disseminating those findings. And that starts with making sure that stakeholders are engaged from the beginning, and we produce dissemination-ready findings, and that we also learn how to then adapt as necessary, scale and spread effective interventions, because not always the exact same size of results will fit all, not just at the patient level, but at the community level. We've got to overcome and address the disparities in outcomes in this country. And I would just end by saying that this field is young. CER is a growing field, and we have still a lot to learn, and we need to figure out how to leverage all the opportunities in terms of data and patient engagement to conduct meaningful and relevant CER. And I've said, actually, we're learning how to learn. And or maybe to use PCORI's phrase, research done differently, and how to do that. And we have to share those learnings. And there are many ways to do that, and PCORI and ARC have annual meetings this fall that we're delighted at Academy Health to help them with, and Academy Health also has a journal, eGEMS, where a lot of CER investigators are publishing their sort of lessons learned about conducting research with new types of data. So again, thank you to the NPC for this survey, and I'll stop now.
Since you were so kind to be with us and you gave us some great feedback just then, one of the things that you raised in your comments just now was on PCORnet, and I think it's worth having just a couple more minutes from you on how that's going. People are very interested in the network and how the build-out is going, and when can we expect to see that fully engaged, and what else can you tell us about PCORnet at this point?
Thanks, Dan. I mean, the first thing to be said about PCORNet is that it is a grand experiment. It is, we have a slide with 12 challenges, and every one of those 12 is truly immensely challenging. Yet in just over a year now of work, we have built a PCORNet community across 11 very large delivery systems or delivery system areas. Really, there's, I think, on the order of 45 delivery systems involved through those 11 clinical data research networks and 18 patient-powered networks. And so, we've come a long ways, I think, in building up a culture in this group. In the area of data, we have come a long ways and reached agreement on a common data model, are populating that common data model, taking data from a disparate set of electronic health records and working to add insurance claims data to create complete cohorts, something on the order of 25 to 50 million. It'll be a little clear near the end of the summer exactly how many people are currently in observation. Being very close to launching the first clinical trial in this network. It's a very pragmatic question of what's the right dose of aspirin for people who are trying to prevent a recurrence of a heart attack or stroke. Is it a baby aspirin a day or an adult aspirin a day, which is safer and more effective? So that's a nice example and a trial that will test many aspects of PCORNet. Also launching observational studies, large observational studies on 2 questions related to obesity, one on the effectiveness of various bariatric surgery procedures, including the more recently introduced gastric sleeve, and also a second question about the use of narrow versus broader spectrum antibiotics in infants and young children and the comparative impact on development of obesity. So, and a third project which aims to really bring the delivery systems and plans into conversations about how does one use a network infrastructure like PCORNet to change practice and to move toward becoming learning health systems. So I think the progress is exciting. It has captured, which is surprising to me really, it has something as kind of technical as building a data infrastructure, has captured the imagination of lots of people. So there's a lot of eyes on it, and we are working very hard to get it right. It takes involvement and some rewards for every stakeholder group in the network. I think that's a lesson we learned or we heard early on, maybe a lesson that some earlier networks didn't quite grasp, that there's got to be a business case for the patients, for the clinicians who are entering the data, for the delivery systems who are giving access to the data, as well as for funders and researchers. So, we are aiming to build a network that will be used by the NIH, that will be used by industry, and we keep those advisors close to us so that we build something that is useful. And phase 2 will begin in October of 2015, perhaps a little bigger, some new players, and a little bigger than phase 1. And it is safe to say we need to conduct various kinds of comparative effectiveness research as phase 2 launches, and our capacities will continue to grow during phase 2. But and we really look for opportunities to partner with other data sources. One critical example is patient registries, registries that are specific to a particular disease or a treatment or a procedure, a joint replacement registry, just as one example. Because registries tend to go deeper than even the electronic health record goes. They have deeper, richer data on a particular subset of patients. And we can round that out, provide comparisons, provide long-term follow-up information, and augment information in registries. So it's as I said, it's a grand vision with a lot of kinks to work out, but a lot of support and goodwill throughout the research enterprise.
Yeah. Well, and as you said, Joe, there are a lot of eyes on it, a lot of interest in the network, and we were just talking in the room here, that may be something that we want to add into the survey as we go forward, to kind of track the interest and progress of the Peace Corps net. I'm going to take a question that we got on Twitter and pose it to Kimberly here in the room, and it's how did we predict 3 to 5 years till we see expected impact? So why don't you take that one?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. There's been a conversation happening on Twitter related to this question of how did we predict when CER was going to have an impact 3 to 5 years. And let me say, it makes me excited whenever we're doing a webinar and I actually start to see conversations on Twitter. It's really nice to see people participating that way, and I appreciate your jumping in there. So how did we predict? We did not actually make a prediction. So this particular survey was a survey of stakeholder opinions. So for these survey questions, we asked the people, the 122 people taking this survey, how much of an improvement do you think CER will have on healthcare decision-making in 3 years? Will it have a substantial improvement, a moderate improvement, a slight improvement, or no effect? We also asked them the same question for 5 years. So that's really representing their opinion on how much of an impact it will have in those particular time periods. So we didn't make a prediction. It's the opinion of the people that we surveyed. Now, in that thread, another question that came in was how interesting it would be to, say, go back to the 2012 survey when people said, oh, in 3 years it's going to have this level of an effect, and then match that up to this year's survey, 2015, and see, oh, okay, what actually happened. And yes, we thought that would be interesting too, and we did look at it. Let me caution, this is kind of when you do a back-of-the-envelope equation. It's not really a direct comparison that one can cleanly make because, of course, we are talking to slightly different people every year, and one is a looking forward question, one is a looking backwards question, so they're not directly comparable. But as I alluded to when I was presenting the slide originally, this particular chart looks the same almost every year. So if we had looked at what the 2012 prediction was next 3 years out, people were pretty optimistic that it was going to have a substantial to moderate improvement on healthcare decision making. And when we look at this year's survey and historically look back, not so much. We're not seeing that. So again, that's a back-of-the-envelope type of comparison. It is an interesting one to make, and as I mentioned before, what I find so interesting is how people have continued optimism, and they just kind of reevaluate each year. Something Dan said that I just want to throw out there, as we look ahead to next year's survey, we are thinking it's time to add some new questions, do a bit of a refresh. So if you've got thoughts on things that you think might be interesting for us to consider adding to the survey for next year, please send them in as questions or tweet them to us. We're certainly open to considering any ideas that folks have for what might be interesting to ask in the survey.
And Joe, I'd like to kind of lob that 3 to 5 year question at you as well, because this, as Kimberly said, we've seen with our respondents in the survey over the last several years that it's a horizon issue for them. It still seems to be just over the next hill, right? But every year it seems to be just over the next hill. No one is closer to the issue than you are, knowing your pipeline of research that you have now funded that's underway. Do you think the 3 to 5 time frame is reasonable? Is it going to be further out before you start seeing meaningful results come in, or potentially earlier?
Okay, Dan, well, you got me out on a limb now, and I have to answer your question. I think 3 to 5 years is reasonable. I think 3 to 5 years in 2011 was a little, didn't take into account, number one, some of the chores that PCORI had to do before it could even fund any comparative effectiveness research, like the national priorities and method standards, to name two, and also didn't quite take into account the fact that the research takes, almost minimally 3 years to do, and on top of that, there's a little bit of time for the dissemination to take effect, even if we build engagement and dissemination in early on. So what is happening now is the end of 2015, the end of this calendar year, we will begin seeing, and I should say we've seen a very few studies, including some interesting ones, come to conclusion already, but not many. We don't really expect many. The end of this year and especially the first half and thereafter in 2016. So I think 3 years, yes. 5 years, better be. That we really should be able to see a trend. The other thing is, I think, as these research results start coming in, we do have to be more transparent and more visible, I think, in terms of making those links between findings and implementation. And there's a lot we and others can do there, and a lot that ARC can contribute as well. So to summarize, I think 3 to 5 years is realistic.
Good. Thank you. We have been getting some questions through the web interface, and I'd like to take one off the web now, and Joe is coming directed to you, if you don't mind. Academia and industry are the major entities that are conducting research. How does PCORI ensure that it is patient-centered? When you're funding some of these projects through academic centers, through other partners, how do you ensure or bake in, if you will, the patient-centeredness into that process?
Well, it's really baked in from the beginning. Before we even prioritize a question, and I'm speaking now about our targeted funding, we make certain that patients believe this is a patient-centered question. When we review applications, we make sure that the patients on the merit review panel believe this is a patient-centered question. We require engagement of patients, pretty intense engagement of patients throughout the research process. So we have a, sort of a doubly or triply backed up approach to making sure that the research we fund is patient-centered. And, beyond that, I think this notion of involving patients in research is such a no-brainer when you think about it long-term, that when you think about it for any period of time, that it's at least the language is being picked up by a number of others. So those of you who know about 21st Century Cures, an initiative coming out of the House of Representatives to beef up the basic science research and the regulatory processes to ensure a really healthy flow of new treatments. They have now really championed and endorsed the notion of patient-centeredness and patient engagement in the development of in identifying needs for new drugs and in developing these new drugs. So it's just catching on everywhere. Centeredness is one thing, and that's
and Joe, by the way, I'm on the line.
Oh, hi, Lisa. I'll be quiet in just a second then. Welcome back. The other thing is that engagement is turning out to be something that once people do it, most of them say, this really changes the research and makes it more relevant. I think I'll keep doing it. So I think it's here to stay too, along with the ER.
So, and we have a number of questions that are coming in from the webcast, so that's great. I think there's one that was directed to Joe, but I think it applies to both Joe and Lisa. And so maybe Joe, you take it first from your perspective, but it's around building a business case. And you mentioned in your remarks, Joe, the need to create a business case for providers to collect the data needed for CER. What progress, if any, do you see being made on this account? So that's for you, Joe, and I guess for Lisa, from your perspective on the same question, how the health service research community who's been involved in conducting research for years, but not necessarily comparative effectiveness. What's the business case that they would need to start zeroing in and doing more comparative work? Joe, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, I'll speak mostly to PCORNet, but really it influences just about all the research we fund. To build this kind of a data research network, you need some involvement of the delivery system just to allow, for example, access to data, sharing of data, and access to patients, actually. And systems often go that far, but they don't go as far as really learning about what the data can offer or using the data. And that's what it takes. I mean, that's what engagement means. We're dedicating, we just announced, or we're, let me see, maybe we didn't technically announce it yet, but we're very interested within InfoCoreNet in supporting a certain line of research that brings systems leaders to the table to look at the data with researchers. This idea of bringing researchers and systems leaders closer together is just crucial. Breaking down the cultural barriers, learning to speak the same language, making the research more rapid cycle and iterative. That's really that's a burden for the researchers to respond to. And let me mention one of the group, the clinicians who actually collect and enter the data. There has to be something in it for them, and the something we think is the potential that they could ask and get their questions answered, and that I think once people get used to using data, they love it and they keep doing it. But they really need a legitimate opportunity to do that. You can't think of physicians as data enterers only.
So Lisa,
yeah, just to build on what Joe said. So first at the clinical sort of data collection end, I also think we have to figure out much more, and we're nowhere near there yet, how the data can be collected so that the clinician is actually not even given any burden. It's just a byproduct of the electronic data and the medical record and the care process. Second is we have to definitely leverage patients and their role in data collection as well. But getting back to the ROI or the business case, I think that's also, we have to show impact of CER. And in fact, I would point listeners to the Journal of Comparative Effectiveness Research, which came out with a special issue last winter, where our colleagues at Mathematica, Gene Rich and his colleagues, Dominic Esposito, and several other authors published a series of articles on evaluating a mid-course evaluation of the ERA investments in CER. And clearly it was mid-course, we don't have impact yet, but I think we all have to do a much better job of figuring out how to assess the impact of research, because those are the stories we need to tell. Impact not just on patients and their care and their outcomes, but also impact on care costs and overall, elimination of health disparities.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I think this has been great. We always enjoy this particular webinar and sharing the results of our survey, and we learn something new every year. So I'm going to thank both of our guests, Lisa Simpson and Joe Selby, and thank you to my colleague here in the office, Kimberly Westrich, for managing this project again for us, and we look forward to it again next year. And thanks all for attending today's webinar.